Welcome to Design History, The Invention of Writing, Chapter 1. Graphic design is all about dialogue, about communication. It teaches, informs, persuades, and comments on culture and life. So why study graphic design history? Well, design reflects the culture and period of time it was created. As we get started, I want you to think about what designers from the past were trying to communicate. To look for visual clues, get inspired, and learn to be a style detective in our course. Now, chapters 1 to 8 lay the foundation for our course and help you understand how styles evolved. You won't be tested on the material till we get to the Victorian era. Chapter 1 talks about 3 important innovations in the development of Homo sapiens: the thoughtful and deliberate development of tools, speech, the ability to make sounds in order to communicate, and writing, the visual counterpart of speech. The focus of this chapter is on the origins of writing, its influence on the development of civilization, how it impacted social order or economic progress, technology, and cultural developments. It outlines the development of writing from representational prehistoric images of cave drawings to pictographic abstract symbols and phonetic visual language systems of the ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians. This includes cuneiform and hieroglyphics. Here's our first set of style characteristics. If you have a printout of your syllabus, all the style characteristics are listed near the end. As our tests are open book, you'll want to have them handy during our midterm and final exams. The characteristics are visual clues that let you know what kind of image you're looking at. We'll begin splitting styles and learning to identify one from another when we reach Chapter 9. In Paleolithic cave drawings, we see naturalistic renderings of animals. They wanted animals to look the way they did in nature: sympathetic magic ochre, earth tones, charcoal outlines, some overlapping, but no deep space. Our story really begins on September 8th, 1940. There, sitting on that rock, is 17-year-old Marcel Ravidat. He was out with 3 of his friends looking for lost treasure that was supposedly buried in a secret tunnel in the woods near their home in Montagnac, France. He had a dog named Robot who ran out ahead of them and became stuck in a hole, and when the boys pulled Robot to safety, they discovered a hole that seemed bottomless. They were certain that they had found the treasure-filled tunnel, and they didn't have a light to explore, so they returned on September 13 with a homemade lantern. Carefully, they made their way down into the cave and across a large room that was about 100 feet long and 40 feet wide. This turned into a narrow passage as they entered it, and when they raised their lamp high, they discovered that the walls were filled with the shapes of many animals. The boys decided to tell their school teacher, Leon Laval, about their discovery because they knew he was really interested in archaeology and would know what to do with their fantastic find. They could have never imagined that they had discovered one of the most important sites of prehistoric man. Lascaux is far superior to other caves in France because it's much larger and the artifacts are better preserved. You can look at the paintings and tell what they are and what they symbolize. They're estimated to be 17,300 years old, and they consist of large animals, most which are known from fossil evidence to have lived in the area at the time. We see random placement and shifting scale. This shows the prehistoric people's lack of structure and sequence when they recorded their experiences. But some of the animals we might see in the caves are mammoths, horses, lions, and deer, along with symbols of humans. So cave art lets us glimpse into the lives of early humans 40,000 years ago. Over 400 art-filled caves and shelters have been found so far. People started by drawing really graffiti and painting on rocks and walls of caves. The color black was made from charcoal, and a range of warm tones from red and yellow iron oxides were ground down from earth materials. Perhaps the pigment was smeared on the walls with a finger or using a bristle or reed brush. Bones with notches have also been found from this period, and we don't know with certainty what the purpose of these beautiful images of animals painted on caves was, or the purpose of many repeated signs. But they were probably connected to magical rites to foster hunting. The notches engraved on bones and stones were a way to count something, like how many days had passed, the lunar months, or how much prey they had captured. So these pictures were made for survival, utilitarian, and ritualistic purposes. The cave contains nearly 2,000 figures that are in three main categories. You've got animals, human figures, and abstract signs. They contain no images of the surrounding landscape or the vegetation at the time. And we find these caves all over the world. This is the Cueva de los Manos in Argentina. And we are looking here at early graphic communication, when people etched and painted their thoughts on stone. So this brings us to Mesopotamian artifacts. We see stylized figures, so they're not naturalistic or detailed, they're cartoon-like. And we see a representation of figures, both frontal and profile, a grid system in writing. We've got pictographs in early examples, and what we call cuneiform in later ones. So Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means between the rivers, and it's referring to that area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Today, it's modern Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. And the Mesopotamians left us with the earliest written records known. They derived a system of writing called cuneiform. And as you can see in the lower image, they made marks on clay tablets by impressing the plastic material with web-shaped ends of carved sticks. They invented arithmetic, they built schools, businesses, temples, palaces, workshops. They even came up with a system to collect taxes. They knew agriculture for 1,000 years, and so they felt a need to notate their agricultural products. Rulers imposed taxes on the subjects as agricultural products, and what they did is used these resources to pay for the construction of palaces and temples, also to maintain the army and the court. And religion really dominated the Mesopotamian city-state. There was a massive step temple compound called the ziggurat, and that's where the priests and scribes had enormous power because they're the ones who controlled the inventory of the gods and the king. They ministered to the magical and religious needs of the people. And again, we find many clay tablets, and you can see here drawings of some of the symbols that were created by the wedge-shaped marks called cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, or wedge-shaped. Writing began with pictures, but this system wasn't convenient for conveying much, only simple nouns. So it became more abstract and evolved to encompass abstract concepts. This eventually took the form of the world's earliest writing, cuneiform. This clay tablet demonstrates how symbols for star, which also meant heaven or God, head, there in the middle, and water evolved from early pictographs to later ones. So you can see that evolution. Cuneiform became rebus writing, which is pictures and pictographs representing words and symbols with the same or similar sound as the object depicted. scribes began schooling at the Edaba, which is the writing school or tablet house, before the age of 10, and they worked from sunrise to sunset every day each month. This is the Blau Monument, the oldest artifact combining words and pictures on the same surface. It's made of shale, and it's early Sumerian from the 3rd quarter of the 4th millennium. This is another example of a stele bearing the code of Hammurabi. It was initially written between 1792 and 1750. And on the right, you can see that densely textured law code at the bottom. Above it is an image of King Hammurabi on a mountaintop with the seated sun god Shamash, who's ordering the king to write down the laws for the people of Babylon. Here's a detail so that you can see the type and writing better. I took this particular photo at the British Museum, and it's a gypsum stela of an Assyrian king from his capital city, which is now Iraq. And he's protected by the symbols there at the top of his principal gods. A cuneiform inscription covers all faces of this particular monolith with really bombastic proclamations like, "With their blood I dyed the mountain red as red wool, while the ravines and torrents of the mountains swallowed the rest of them." It was really traditional to create a lot of elaborate curses to safeguard monuments. Here's a detail I shot at the Vatican Museum in Rome. It's a 1721 BC inscription of Sargon from the inner court of a palace, and it's an excellent example of cuneiform. All of the great Mesopotamian civilizations used cuneiform until it was abandoned in favor of an alphabetic script around 100 BCE. Now, Egyptian artifacts have stylized figures too, and women and men have different colored skin. Colors are originally bright, but extant artifacts show earth colors, and we see registers or horizontal bands and hieroglyphics. So we're going back to the British Museum, and I wanted to tell you that it's really celebrated for many treasures like the Rosetta Stone, Egyptian mummies, Parthenon sculptures. Their collection covers archaeology, world culture, science, decorative applied arts, as well as prints and drawings. And I was there about 2 years ago, and the Rosetta Stone is at the British Museum. It's been exhibited there since 1802 with only one break. Towards the end of the First World War in 1917, when the museum was really concerned about heavy bombing in London, they moved the Rosetta Stone to safety, and it spent the next 2 years in a station on the Postal Tube Railway 50 feet below the ground. So here it is. I took this photo of the Rosetta Stone. It was carved in 196 BC. I wanted to have a figure with it so you could see the scale of the stone. It was found in 1799 by French soldiers who were rebuilding a fort in Egypt, and it's got writing on it in both Egyptian and Greek using 3 different scripts: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek. The French scholar Jean-François Champignon realized hieroglyphs recorded the sound of the Egyptian language. The stone is a tablet of black rock called granodiorite. It's part of a larger inscribed stone that would have stood some 2 meters high. The top part of the stone has broken off at an angle. Carved in 196 BC, Champignon deciphered the hieroglyphs in 1822. He could read both Greek and Coptic letters, and he was able to figure out what the 7 demotic signs in Coptic were. By looking at how the signs were, he was able to work out really what they stood for. And he then began tracing these signs back to hieroglyphic signs. He made a lot of educated guesses, and his discovery gave scholars the ability to understand what life in ancient Egypt was like. Here's a detail I photographed at the British Museum of Hieroglyphs carved in stone. I really wanted you to see how remarkably beautiful they are. The word comes from the Greek hiero, holy, and glypho, writing. In the ancient Egyptian language, hieroglyphs were called the gods' words, as it was believed that writing was an invention of the gods. And a scribe was the person who recorded in writing the everyday life and extraordinary happenings in ancient Egypt. They had a really varied job. They might write letters for fellow villagers, or record the amount of crops harvested, calculate how much food was needed, order supplies for temples or the army. And the Egyptians valued learning because it divided the ruling class from those who were ruled. Thus, a scribe was exempted from all hard work, trouble, and labor. In short, he was a lucky man. He was treated with respect, never lacked food, and he could become a wise man of the court or a leader. When a boy was selected to go to school, the education was really difficult, lots of work. Teachers were really strict as they were responsible for educating future scribes who carried the burden of really immortalizing the ideas, stories, and legends of the gods. So English is based on 26 characters or letters, and we combine those letters into words and then into sentences, and that tells a story. Ancient Egyptian writing uses more than 2,000 hieroglyphic characters, and each hieroglyph represents a common object in ancient Egypt. Hieroglyphs could represent the sound of the object or an idea associated with the object. These Egyptian hieroglyphs illustrate the rebus principle. So words and syllables are represented by pictures of objects and symbols whose names are similar to the word or the syllable that's trying to be communicated. So let's take a look at these hieroglyphs, and they read from top to bottom. On top, if you take a look at that, it looks like a wasp, but it's actually a bee. Below is a leaf. Put the two together and you've got belief. On the right, we see another rebus. On top, it represents sea, and below the sun. Put it together, season. So that shows you how hieroglyphs communicated. And this idea isn't lost on contemporary graphic designers. This is the work of the American designer Paul Rand. It's a clever rebus for IBM that he created in 1981. The hieroglyph for scribe depicted the old kingdom palette. They had a drawstring sack that they used to store dried ink cakes, and a reed brush holder where the top popped off and you could put your brushes inside. So now I want to show you these glyphs that show the evolution for scribe. The art of writing was an important component in the evolution of Egyptian dynasties. It was a privilege enjoyed by really the upper echelon of society. So on the left, we see a more realistic hieroglyphic manuscript hand, and eventually evolving from the hieratic script to the Demotic in 400 BC. This is an image of the beautiful Egyptian Book of the Dead. I've actually seen this piece in a museum called the Bodmer under the Lake of Geneva. And it's written like a first-person narrative by the deceased and placed in the tomb to help them triumph over the dangers of the underworld. In this scene, Ani, who was a royal scribe, a temple accountant, and his wife Thutu are arriving for their final judgment. These images are of Native American Indian petroglyphs from the Southwest. I'm personally in love with the Southwest and just got back from a trip, and you can find symbols like these carved or painted on rocks throughout the western United States. It's really fascinating to me that these petroglyphic figures, animals, and signs are really similar to those found all over the world. Some are ideographs, which are symbols that represent ideas or concepts. 15 years ago, my husband and I bought a home in central Mexico in a town called San Miguel de Allende. I was lucky enough to hike to see these pyramids that were recently discovered. It's called La Cañada de la Virgen. Archaeologists believe they were created by the Otomi people around 350 AD, and these pyramids were home to priests, scribes, and astronomers. Here you can see an example of a petroglyph on one of the rocks at Cañada de la Virgen. These amazing design motifs on the right are from Mexico. They were found on pyramids and petroglyphs created by Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas. I think they have a timeless quality. And we have a book called Design Motifs of Mexico in our college library in graphic design. It's by Jorge Enciso, and if you're interested, you could go online even to check it out. How could ideas about petroglyph style influence contemporary work? I would like to close by showing you the work of a very popular contemporary illustrator, Joel Nakamura. Joel lives in New Mexico, and he's a friend of mine. He went to Art Center College of Design, and he's really inspired by folk art, petroglyphs, and myths from Native Americans in the Southwest. Native Americans believed that the speed in which the wings of a dragonfly moved would open up doorways to realms and dimensions. There on the right, you can see Joel's interpretation of that. So let's take a moment to visit his studio in Santa Fe.
Atlas has possibilities to be a painting. What's important to me is the process that I'm just going to create this work. I have to go through the process of creating it. The journey to create the work, to me, is more important than the actual physical artifact of the work. I don't take myself that seriously. I like to have fun with the pictures I create. I want to have people have fun. I want it to be a fun experience to view my paintings, that maybe they get a little laugh about what's going on in that painting, and maybe they find a little joy for themselves and experience the joy that I had creating it.